This is the first of our distinguished lecture series for 2011. Afterwards, there's going to be a reception in the lobby of Hawk Hall. So let me introduce our guest. We're so pleased to welcome our speaker today, Dr. Joseph Bordogna. Dr. Bordogna is the Alfred Moore Professor of Engineering at the University of Pennsylvania. He received a bachelor's and Ph.D. degrees in electrical engineering from Penn and a master's degree from MIT. Dr. Bordogna has had a very distinguished and diverse career. So here's the list. He's been a Navy officer. He's worked in industry. He's an internationally recognized engineering educator and researcher. He's been the director of Penn's Moore School, the dean of the School of Arts and Sciences at Penn, president of the IEEE, and he served as a presidentially appointed deputy director and chief operating officer for NSF for 14 years, and 3 administrations, which must not have been easy. He has numerous honors, including an IEEE, he's a fellow of IEEE, eminent member of Kappa, recipient of the IEEE Mulligan Education Award, NSF Distinguished Service Medal. He was elected to the ASEE Hall of Fame for Engineering Educators. And last but not least, he has a plateau named after him in the Antarctica. Which is not an easy thing for an electrical engineer. This talk today is entitled Life on the Edge, Embracing Cacophony, Enabling Symphony. So please help me welcome our distinguished speaker, Dr. Kappa.
Well, we have maybe a half hour to say some things, and I hope you'll not just ask questions, but challenge everything I say. That's what you're, especially the young people I see here. The job for all of us that are older is to set things in your hands so you can lead better than we did. So I'm going to try to, how many people read the abstract? Okay, so there's Zoom, right? But the idea of embracing cacophony is the idea that if you're at the frontier, which we expect you all to be, it's chaos out there. In fact, if you're comfortable in your work, you're probably not at the frontier. And the idea is it's sort of like an orchestra where you go for the first few minutes, this chord, and everybody's checking their instruments out, and then you hear a beautiful symphony. So you have to embrace the chaos at the frontier. That's the beauty of it. And then you enable symphony by doing something with it. That's an engineering thing. My favorite definition of engineers from a fellow named Fumio Lada, who probably nobody knows, but he defines it in a nice, short, crisp way, integrating all knowledge to some purpose. All knowledge. So part of what I'm going to do today is set you in a brief presentation into what I think we are today by looking back at the past a little bit. So, for example, what is academe all about? It happens to be named as academe. It came from the fellow named Academus, Greece, who gave a spot for Socrates to do what? To make connections and learn. And that's what the thread is. That's what we're doing here, making connections and learn. And there he could walk around. There wasn't much technology in those days, so for communicating, so he met and talked with people and so on. And then all through the years, technology came along, and you know, there's semaphore and all kinds of things happened, telephones and so on. And I remember when I was in the Navy in 1958, one of the first cables across the ocean, telephone messages, because the way you had to communicate telephone, it's just like in the old movies, you talk and you hear over, somebody has to talk to you back and it fades and all that. It's called electromagnetic radiation. And my ship was going to the Netherlands, and they had a spot there where you could reserve for 24 hours head time on talking on the new cable, which had the capability of 4 messages simultaneously. 40. And then the next one that went across had 400. And then eventually, when they got some optic there, it was 40,000. So this making connections and learn is critical to what we're all doing. And if you think about the last half century, we've gone from 30 tons to the world in our hand under our thumbs. Now, what does that mean? The ENIAC, which is noted as the first all-electronic general-purpose digital computer, weighed 30 tons. And if you think of walking around with that in your hand, you can't do it. The very youngest people just think there it is, and it's important, but they don't even think about where it came from. So I want you to get a feel for what you're doing here, especially in electrical engineering, since most of you, I think, are there. So I'm going to try to walk through some things about this. Now, Adam Smith, when people know Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. I think most people haven't read The Wealth of Nations. So we have this kind of mystic thing that's happened, Invisible Hand and all those things. But it is an important document in the sense of basing how you run a democracy and capitalism together. And most people know that a big part of what he was saying is manufacturing, making things. But he said to moving, so nobody remembers that anymore, the making and moving of things. And today we come up to this point where the moving is very important. Because you make something, you get on the web, you get on the internet, and you order something, transportation has to be there to do it. So transportation is very, very important. He was talking in essence of infrastructure. And one of the things he said is interesting that hardly anybody knows is that who should provide the infrastructure? He says the government. Now that would be surprising to most people. So the internet is a government-sponsored idea that now is part of the infrastructure and very, very important. So we want to think of those things as we go along. Now, when did Adam Smith write that book? Published in 1776. And that was the date of the American Revolution starting. And there was some concern about when they saw this document from him, there was concern that, well, if we revolt and so on, all the things we get from Great Britain, we'll do ourselves, mainly manufacturing. And they worried a lot about the infrastructure. And from then on, there was this belief that, as Adam Smith says, that the infrastructure belongs to the government. And then we come along over time, and other things happen. We have, in the early part of last century, we had a number of people making some noise about things. And one was Peter Schumpeter, who wasn't talked much about until about 15, 20 years ago. He wrote a book in the 1940s on capitalism and socialism, communism, and so on. And there was a chapter in there called Creative Destruction. Now, what he meant by that is if you're in a capitalistic system, if you don't destroy what you're doing, somebody else is going to come on your flank and do it for you. Now, when going to Congress and trying to raise money for NSF to do its thing, creative destruction is sort of a harsh thing. So we sort of morphed it into creative destruction, creative transformation. You change something. So you always have to keep at it. And that's now sort of a mantra for fast-moving change in how our economy goes. That we must do that. Creative destruction becomes a great part of innovation, which is a word now that most people use as a mantra word. We can just get innovating. We really can be back on track here. So that's an important thing, what's happening now. Then we have Jose Garcia Gasset, who back in the 20s and 30s was giving a lot of lectures. He put in a book called Mission of the Universities. He was a Spanish philosopher. There's something, it's pretty easy to read, but it's something important for what we struggle with still, of how we not only do reductionist research work in the university, but we do integrated work also. So he had a nice statement, which I want to read to you, which now becomes important for us. The idea of Jose said, it's also nice if you're an engineer and you quote this person, because when you do, if I were in an audience of liberal arts people and humanists and so on, I'd be very proud of the fact that an engineer knew this fellow, because they revere him a lot. So it's another part I want to tell you today. You've got to mix it all up. I'm going to end up with some suggestions on that. The need to create sound syntheses and systemizations of knowledge. We'll call it a kind of scientific genius. Now, he's smart. He's in the right words here. Scientific genius, who hitherto has existed only as an aberration. The genius for integration. So you know still that when you do a dissertation, you've got to dig down deeply, get the truth, do a terrific job, be disciplinary about it, and it's very, very important. Nowadays, you're also hear of connections between nanotechnology and bioscience and all these kinds of things. So it's deeper than just interdisciplinary work. And by the way, if you use the word interdisciplinary, disciplines made it very strong. So interdisciplinary itself doesn't mean much. It means there's good connection between very, very good, well sought out disciplines. So he said the genus of integration is very important here. Of necessity, this means specialization. Smart too, because we have specialists and experts and all that. So this would be kind of an expert. So necessity, this means specialization, as all creative effort inevitably does. But this time, the person will be specializing in the construction of the whole. If you think of energy, and you think of Coelho's definition of integrating all knowledge on purpose, there's a connection there. This is not to minimize the reductionist piece. This is the issue. Both these things are important, and the integration is more newer and trying to be something you get rewarded for. So he says the momentum which impels investigation to dissociate indefinitely into particular problems, the polarization of research makes necessary a compensated control as in any healthy organization, which is to be furnished by a force pulling in the opposite direction, constraining centrifugal science into a wholesome organization. The selection of professors will depend not only on their rank as investigators, but on their talent for synthesis. That has not been accomplished yet, but it's moving toward that. Now, I want to emphasize, this is not a this or that. And particularly for an engineer, it's both. You have to come to a table of investigation with skills of some kind. And in fact, if you, more and more I see tables I sit around, you have skills of all different kinds, eclectic skills. And you have a cacophonous kind of discussion because people see things in different ways if they've done their homework. You can't go to a table like that unless you bring not just your skill, but you investigate if this thing's going to be talked about and you have a strong opinion. I want to encourage this thing that engineers really have to think carefully of. Okay, so I want to talk now about Peter Drucker. How many people in this place don't know Peter Drucker? Peter Drucker has passed away. Well, Peter Drucker is a very famous management guru. He's passed away for some time now. And he was the person in the United States most people listen to a lot. But here's a wonderful definition of innovation. I'm picking some of these things out because of the key issues of maybe how we can get together and get this country moving in the right kind of direction. So Drucker defined innovation this way. And I'm going to, at the front end of this definition, to emphasize people. We forget about that. We get involved in formulas and block diagrams, all kinds of, not necessarily bureaucratic things, important things, of how this thing's going to work and so on. And the people slip out of our mind. It's the thing we're working with. So let's look at this definition. He says that innovation has a lot to do with new knowledge. So to begin things, you have to create new knowledge. And that's what research is very important. So NSF funds a lot, and what it's supposed to do well. I'm going to talk about the history of NSF too before we finish, because that's important for you to know. Most people don't know about that. So you need new knowledge. And then he makes a nice kind of statement that knowledge is inherently human. Without people, you get no knowledge. You're stuck at the front end about innovation unless you focus on the people. NSF, you'll find out when I tell you the definition, was started mostly as an investment by federal money to create a world-class science and engineering workforce. Graduate them out there every year, having done research, learning by discovery and all of that. Both are important. I'll get back to that. So you start off with knowledge. You need it. Without people, you don't get it. So you can use knowledge in two ways, he says. One is you apply it to things you know how to do. We know how to build a car, 100 years. So make the car better, cheaper, faster, productivity. That's the definition of that. But if you take this knowledge and you apply it to things that are new and different, that's innovation. Now, if you look at the whole process, you take this new knowledge, and in a capitalistic system, you have entrepreneurs who will take this knowledge, take some risk, try to get it in the marketplace in some way, and then if it works, you can win or lose in this. If it works, you start creating wealth, and then as you grow, and you start meeting what? People. And you hear now, I'm also trying to relate what you hear now as to what happened long ago, in what's happening. Right now, there are jobs, but people can't take them because they're not prepared for them. So, you need people at both ends here. And when we talk about this innovation, I'd like you to really think hard about what are we doing this for, and what is innovation really about? Because we use innovation as a mantra now, ASEE. Then we have another issue, the flat world. How many people have read Friedman's Flat World book? Okay, how many people know about the flat world idea? Most people. Okay, a lot of people don't. Well, before Friedman, who's a very exceptionally great guy, wrote this book, The World is Flat. And what it was, in essence, was a good book, but in essence it was the internet has made us better connected. So connections are learned. Back from this academe, growth of academe, now we're into the world's connection. And that's what I talked about, from 30 tons of the world in your hand under your thumb. That's what he's talking about. And that's important. But then our polity made a panacea out of it. If we only dig on that, and work on that, and so on. And then other things started to come up from people thinking more deeply. Joseph Stiglitz, who's a Nobel laureate, was an advisor to some presidents on economy, and he says the world is not flat. Richard Florida, another economist, jumps on it, so the word is the world will be spiky too. Not just flat, but it's spiky too. So you envision, I'll tell some graphics of this. You take the globe, and then you put the pinnacles on spots on Earth that are creating a lot of wealth. And if you look at the progress of the last 10 years or so, you see these pinnacles getting thinner and higher. And there are only maybe 20 of them. So while you're creating wealth, you're also creating violence and destitution. So the idea of spreading the wealth, not spreading too well, it's separating. You're going to be engineers, you have to think about this. You have to think about that in terms of the world is flat. They're both important. And then you have what perhaps maybe the major problem right now. It's never talked about in terms of maybe the world is still round. What that means is, if you take the polity, us around the world, we work in terms of nation states. We have 195 or so of them now. And nation states are built for the leader of the state to protect the boundaries and protect the people in there. Now, that's what it's about. But yet we have globalization that crashes all the boundaries. And we don't have to handle it well. So these are important issues. If you're going to be an engineer, you have to think of this. And I'm going to stick this thing in when you design something, you're manifesting your intent for society. And remember, some of the words I used in that abstract were, you can manifest your intent for society consciously, subconsciously, or unconsciously. I put those three in there. I hope you won't be unconscious in this, because if you're unconscious and you're manifesting, no matter whether you've thought or not, you're going to manifest your intent for society for what you do, and then you didn't do it well enough, and you weren't thinking of all this, and then 10, 20, 30 years later, it's a big problem. Because that's not to say you can prevent all that, but be thoughtful of it. You must think of all of that. And this is not just the idea of being a good person. This has a lot to do with the economy and everything in our lives and so on. So I challenge you with that. Okay, so then we go into this business of the round world, polity, and so on. And I'd like you to think of all three of those metaphors when you move ahead on things. Let me now try to give a stretch of, back in 1776, I'm going to repeat that. The Continental Congress got into this whole thing about the 1776 book by Smith. And they thought, we better really think about this. And they picked up right away his suggestion that the government pay for somehow invest in, somehow take care of the infrastructure. Now, infrastructure has a lot of meanings. That's an infrastructure. Roads are an infrastructure. And there'll be new kinds of infrastructures. They're now, NSF has a program now called GENE, General Design for Network Integration, Network Innovation. The process, the reason for that is going to be something like $300 million, something that you get to it. It's in motion now. You can't do research in the net because you can't shut it down for a while and use it. It's always in action. The idea is to build a test bed to become the next kind of internet, but to do things on it like security at the front end. The present internet wasn't built for security. There's all kinds of issues with it, but it's so important in a flat world of distribute the knowledge and enable people. Because this business about 30 tons of the world in the hand of your thumbs is very serious. You enable someone to do that. And that's part of what the government does. I look at the life in some, well, maybe all economic life or any kind of life we have together, of three things that form, this is too simple, but it's an idea you might want to think about. We have a government, we have academia, which I'm talking about pre-K to postdoc, the whole shebang, and we have in academia, the government and the private sector. Now, what are they supposed to do in simplest terms? And they're the experts, and each of them isn't the expert in the other one. So academia is to create knowledge, to integrate it across boundaries, which is sort of always been there, but now it's more important than ever across those boundaries, and to transfer it to the marketplace of the government, the marketplace of society. And that transfer, the best way I think it's transferred is the graduation of the students going out there. Every year, it's phalanx of people going out taking the knowledge with them. That's, by the way, that's obvious in Ph.D.s, but that's why we started research experience on the graduates of NSF. If you're a place where this knowledge is being created, you should take part in that, because you too can take some of it out there. It's a very powerful kind of way to run the place. So that's what's supposed to happen there. The private sector creates wealth. They're going to do it, that's what they do it for, and so on. And then what's the government do? The best way government democracy can really operate is to enable things to happen. In other words, it doesn't make policy. So enablement is very, very important. Now those three pieces, unless they talk to each other, it's not going to be very good. So we need more and more of that interaction. And that's part of the abstract I said somewhere about whether you're conscious, subconscious, or unconscious, you are working in a pool. The cauldron I used, because it's everything swirling around in there, that really exists, and it's the partnering of things. You're going to partner with all of that, whether you're thinking about it or not, so please think about it. That's important. Let me tell you about National Science Foundation. And I'm trying to pick at the things most important, because we've got to stop in about 5 minutes or so. This may be the most important thing. During World War II, what happened there was really the advance of super weapons and all kinds of things. And the way that was handled, especially with the Axis powers, they really were prepared. And one example, for instance, is the Leica company. Leica still has cameras, but Leica was the thing back then. You know, since there are lots of different cameras now. That was the big standard for everything. So the Germans taught the Japanese a lot about this, and they had wonderful optic rangefinders for their battleships. Now, what's the part of the optics thing that is sort of weak? Well, at night you can't use it. So Britain and the United States worked hard on radar. So at night you could do it. Now, those are not nice things to talk about, because they were impelled by the cause of war, which we don't like. But that's what happened there. And all through the war, it was the advance of technology that drove this thing. And by the way, Schumpeter, with the creative destruction, I should stick something in there, and we like to call it creative transformation, to make things change and be on top of things, and not just have a cataclysmic company go down the drain, but start to keep it going so you keep changing it, morphing it all the time. That's a better way to look at the thing. But he also, in this treatise that he wrote, which is very well received, and it matches well what really happens out there in life, was technology is the driver. Now, back when he wrote this in the 40s, yes, it was, but now it really, really is. And again, I want to urge you, especially young people, you can use technology for malevolent use as well as benevolent. So I hope you, when you manifest your intent, you think of the benevolent part. So all these things are around. They're just getting enhanced. They're getting more intense and so on. So during the war, part of this thing about, I'm going to tell you about NSF, is we're in an environment now the last 50, 60 years of things that in the earth, 4.5 billion years old, never happened before, where the government is taking taxpayers' money, investing in new research to be taken off into society and create wealth and jobs and all that kind of thing. It's very formal now. It wasn't before. And in fact, when I was at NSF, there were a lot of agencies becoming 50 years old. We celebrated NSF 50 years, 2 years later celebrated NASA's 50 years, and that just means it wasn't happening before. So during the war, when it started, with all this chaos going on in the war, Roosevelt was advised to meet this guy, Vannevar Bush, who was an engineer, and a very good engineer. He was well known, he was a professor at MIT, and I know when I was a sophomore, I studied circuits in Timby and Bush. And I never knew who that Bush was until I went to NSF. It was the Bush that really was asked in World War II by President Roosevelt to become the head of a new thing, the Scientific Office of Research and Development. And his job was to get a technology and move it in some way to help with the war effort. Now today, I'm going to go back to that in a minute, but just to go off a point, when 9/11 happened, in 2 days or so, in my office, there was the CIA, the FBI, a lot of secret agencies asking for sensors. Who's doing sensors? I'll make a good point now because Vannevar Bush, when he was asked to do this job of getting the research going, there was no grantee base. There was nothing. So he gathered people all over the country and made places like at MIT was the radiation lab. And they worked on radar with the British. And at University of Pennsylvania had the largest mechanical computing machine in the basement of the school in the 1930s. The differential analyzer, which a graduate student there working with Vannevar Bush was a copy of, he developed the first one of those. So there was an intimacy. So he knew computation. So computation was a big thing at Penn. And as things went on, the computation was moving fast enough, so they put vacuum tubes in and they created this thing. And by the way, the peer review, the merit review of the proposal for ENIAC was sent around, and it was unanimously, don't do it. Okay, now that means that NSF, their program officers can at times make sure that maybe they take a risk at times. So this program officer at the Aberdeen Proving Ground, which is the program people doing this, took a task, gave $450,000 in 1 year, pushed the button, the thing worked. Okay, so what was happening back then is near the end of the war, all these things happening, President Roosevelt asked Vannevar Bush at Chatton, asking the question, this is interesting. We've done something that hasn't been done before, and that is we got taxpayers' money to develop this knowledge in a formal way and then move it into the war. And so he says, Vannevar, would you please take a little study of this, and maybe we can do this same formal kind of way of investment of taxpayers' money and new knowledge. We can use it in peacetime. And if you read, there's a beautiful letter, it's a one-page thing, from Roosevelt to Vannevar Bush. We believe Vannevar Bush wrote the letter for Roosevelt to send to him. But the idea is he asked Vannevar Bush to study this thing because maybe we could use this kind of operation and use the new knowledge for civilian purposes, create companies, jobs. And the reason he was really interested in that is among all the problems he had was keeping everybody in leadership in the world at that time. It was just terrible. How are they going to win the war and so on? There's going to be more bloodshed, and he was very agonized. And one of the things is there were 15 million people, citizens of the United States in uniform all over the world, and they were going to come home. And there were no jobs. So it's sort of tragic. Now, there were some jobs that were handled mostly by women. Now, we may have heard the word Rosie the Riveter, that World War II. And he was agonized over that too because there was a social change made of great magnitude, and he didn't want to go knocking the women out. It was just crazy. So then Vannevar Bush thinks a little bit, and he says, well, you don't have a problem with this in any case because the jobs that existed before World War II don't exist anymore. Now, you've heard that today. We need new kinds of jobs offered and so on. So he asked Vannevar Bush to go study this. Vannevar Bush gets a few people like we do in our country and have them all do it. So he comes back with this report with the title, The Endless Frontier. It's a beautiful title because it'll never end. And you open one door in the frontier, and with this chaos all over the place, then you look there and there are 10 more doors to open. It's a wonderful kind of way. Whatever in the universe keeps us going. We're never going to get there, but we keep going. It's an exciting kind of thing. So they started to argue about this, and there were two big issues I want to emphasize here about this report. One was answering the question, should we do this? Use taxpayers' money to invest in the creation of knowledge and so on, and do it in peacetime. And the other question was, where should it be done? Now, there were a lot of federal labs being built during the war, and they were great. They were super. When you get good research, you do it there. But Vannevar Bush argued, and this is important for young people especially, argued that it had to be done at universities. Now, the first response you get is, well, that's good because it's open, it's free, it's not classified, you have people can think of things and things like that of their own volition and what they want to do, and it's very yeasty, and it's very chaotic, and all these kinds of good things. And that's okay, that's good. But the real reason was to create a world-class science and engineering workforce. And that's why you see at NSF the integration of research and education, in which we try to pump up again, because that's what the statute was about in 1950 when this thing started. In fact, the first grants at NSF were fellowships. And if you're really interested in this thing, if you go to the NSF website and you look up this history of the first fellowship class, you'll be astonished of the people in that first class who changed a lot of what happened in the last 50 years. It was a good investment. Now, bottom line here is, this is not about just education and research. It's this combined thing. We all argue that, especially in K-12 and all that, you got to learn through hands-on and through discovery, and that's what you do in the university if you do it well. So it has a meaning, but in the end, it's the people. So this phalanx going out every year, and now we have research experience for undergraduates, so they can take some of this in a research university, and that's what makes this whole thing very formidable. And in this, and the Endless Frontier, you can get that on the web too. You got to take a look at that. It's a really good read, because he had everything in there we argue about now. And especially one that says, and the students that will be supported must be the students, I won't use the exact words, I'll use my own, who did their homework, who are doing well, and it should not be the students who have the money to come and take the classes. Okay, so this is not new stuff, it's old stuff. That's part of the democracy. So it makes us very, very strong. Okay, so that's NSF. And we're now in, I want to read you this little thing here. It's something I wrote in 1988 when I was chairing the editorial board of a society. And I wanted to talk about this issue. I'll read you a little piece of it. I was very concerned because as I grew, it was a long time ago, as I was growing up, I got into this whole business of this two cultures that was started by a couple people saying, this big fight in academia, there are the scientists over here and the technical people, and then you have the humanists over here. And they're different, and they're fighting against each other, and we have this two-culture thing in academia. And I was very uncomfortable with that because I didn't even think about that was going on. I felt comfortable with what I was doing, but it really was serious. So I want to read something here. There's an author called Italo Calvino who had a book come out in 1988, 6 Memos for the New Millennium. Now what this was advice to young authors and what they should think of to be great authors. And what I did here was play out what he said and then tied it to what are great engineers. Okay, same thing it turns out to be, so there's only one culture. Okay, in a sequence of lectures published in 1988 as 6 Memos for the Next Millennium, the Italian author Italo Calvino outlines for young writers 6 criteria for good writing in the next century: lightness, quickness, exactitude, visibility, multiplicity, and consistency. And as I read the lecture, I imagined how directly relevant this guidance is also for the young engineer and technological savant. Just struck me here. The engineer should have quickness and exactitude. So for example, Calvino expounds on lightness as precision and determination, as opposed to vagueness and haphazardness. Isn't this a trait we want to teach our engineering program? And of quickness, this great humanist evokes literal understanding by analogy to things scientific. This is a quote he said to explain this business of quickness. The moment an object appears in a narrative, if you're writing, is charged with a special force and becomes like the pull of a magnetic field, a knot in the network of invisible relationships, unquote. So it's nice that he used an engineering metaphor for somebody who's going to be a great author in the 21st century. In quoting Galileo Galilei, Calvino noted that, quote, quickness to Galileo means good thinking,
agility in reasoning, economy in argument, but also the use of imaginative examples. Doesn't that sound like an engineer? Good advice for authors, but also a straightforward description of good engineering design. Calvino goes on to describe exactitude as a well-defined and well-calculated plan for the work in question, and visibility, and I love this one, as, quote, the power of bringing visions into focus with our eyes shut, unquote. A process well practiced by engineers in creating what has not been. So same thing. And here's where you manifest your intent for society too. Multiplicity he defines as allowing, quote, allowing oneself to become tangled in a network of relationships and the constant struggle to correlate exactitude and chaos, unquote. This is what he wants the authors to do. Sounds like engineering. Alas, Calvino died before completing his definition of consistency. Each of us is left to speculate to that end, but certainly to be consistent in ethical behavior, ensuring freedom with equity, and opting always for excellence is a measure for which we all should strive. Now, one can argue that Calvino's universal message belies supposed differences between the philosophical and the pragmatic by illustrating eloquently that the two lie close to each other in the best of minds. And I want to press this, and part of the theme of what I'm sharing with you, the engineers, innovation is not going to happen without the engineers. And the engineers have to be more involved in the laying out of the plans of something, in the beginning, what it's used for, and so on. Integrate all knowledge to some purpose and carry it to the end. I feel very strongly about engineers can get something from here to there. So sometimes it's just simple with that. Very rarely is an engineer going to drift off and not get to closure on something. And hopefully most of the good closure at some time. So that's the job. Now I'm going to stop. And my effort here, and if you go back, and you probably won't, because the abstract was sort of a little loony, but the idea was to say it that way and then try to fill in the concrete floor in which I was standing to do that, and to encourage you to carry engineering forward, because we really need it. And emphasize again, I don't go with this business, we need more engineers. We need the engineers who can do what I'm talking about here. They have to take some leadership. Because if you don't do it, if you do that, you'll have a career, a robust career, and you won't be taking 7 different jobs. You might morph from this to that, the other thing, but you're always capable to morph with it, because it's always going to change and keep going. So I encourage you to do that, and I spent a little more emphasis than I thought I would on the student thing, because you're most of you here. And I want you to know that I'm wearing my IEEE button. Anybody who's in IEEE, so I got that out and put it on. Okay, I'm going to stop. If there's some questions here, I'll take them. Yes?
Yeah, I'd say in your career, in your career, in your experience in both academia and industry, what's been your, in which environments have you seen people most able to embrace Cacophony and enable Symphony?
Both. I've met great engineers who work in industry. Well, we don't need this, right? I got this in there. I get so excited about your question, because that's a good question in the sense of, it's like this separation. It's in both these things, we have academe, we have the private sector, and we have the government. So I worked in all those things. And not because I planned to, it's another thing. People asked me to do it. And it was a great experience. So every place I went, there are the people who are acting like I was talking here today, who do that, and you need that in anything you do. That's why I put the author recommendations to, sounds like engineering too. There is an essence of leadership which is the same no matter what you do. And one of the big things is get people to trust you to do something. So you can take the bold, some of the kind of words I used in the abstract, bold and eclectic and all those things which you want to do. The difference I might see between academe and industry is just the difference between the two of them. Academe is to create the knowledge, integrate it, get it out there with the graduates in other ways, but that graduate special thing. And in a company, you want to create wealth. So you do it. That doesn't mean you change your attitude about intent for society. Neither one you do. You got to do it all. And I met great people in both places, and good people. So it's more your personality. I love building things. And I wasn't going to become a professor or even get a Ph.D. except that a mentor who was the principal investigator of the ENIAC project and was the director of the Moore School where I went, he was God. You did everything he told you to do. So he suggests I do this, do that. And it's good to have a mentor in some way. Okay? Any other? Oh, my good friend here.
Dr. Bordogna, you talked a bit about the origins of NSF and the original purpose of really building a science workforce. And then I guess NSF moved very quickly along a pathway of basic discovery, pushing the frontiers of knowledge, etc. Now, it's very difficult to get an NSF grant or anything these days without a broader, an impactful broader impact statement. Can you talk a little bit about the origin of the broader impact as it relates to basic science and why that's so important, why NSF felt it was so important to really attach that as part of its portfolio in the way that it did its business?
Well, first thing is taxpayers' money. So it has some meaning. And I learned and pushed a lot of that kind of thing because when I'd go to congressional hearings and so on, it's very difficult to talk to representative senators who, the best of them even, because they don't live in the world we live in. So to be able to say to them, I can't tell you what's going to come out of this. The whole idea of NSF is to do something different at the frontier, take a risk. Nobody in these companies will do it anymore. They can't afford it. Because if they lose, then they lose the whole thing. At NSF, you can get some more tax money and keep it going. So the idea of having some money to try these ideas that move along is very, very important. The thing that's wrong with NSF right now, and I think it's very serious, and there's something you can see on the web too, is a report by the Science Board, which sets the policy for NSF. We have average grant sizes of 150,000, 60,000. They should be 400,000. We have grant 3 years, and by the time you finish 1 year, you're writing proposals again. So we need more money for that. It's not that we need more money for we need it for the essence of what it's all about. We have to enable the researchers to get the job done, and so on. So there are lots of issues like that, and we've mapped it all out. NSF, to do all of that, we only had 1,000 fellowships. So now just a little bit about the impact thing. And we started another 1,000. But what we did there was include in it the K-12 thing. So there's the GK-12 fellowships, which the students who get that like it a lot. And all that essence it says, you're going to just be like a regular fellowship. This is one of the best things you can get out of NSF. It's very prestigious. But sometime during the time you're going to be in the fellowship, you will work with teachers in the school district, help them be at their side. This is not the issue of universities telling the school district what to do, but to be there. And then what happens there naturally is the student will take the teacher to his laboratory or her laboratory, and here's my professor, and you start a partnership there. Impact, greater impact. So it's not that you have to divide the money and do the impact here and this. It's part of the whole thing because it's taxpayers' money. And besides, it sort of makes sense anyway because now we're going to develop new scientists and engineers. So that's one simple. So all what we did was like the IGRT program, and all, they're all put together, about 9 of them, to support the enablement in a known way, but it happens naturally because you have all these things going on. And then at the university, they have IGRTs, they have this, they have that, and then they can, if they got a good lead in diversity, can do this with some facility. The big issue is, of course, it's taxpayers' money. And I want to emphasize that these are not 1 and 2, like the intellectual value of what the proposal is, and the greater impact, because under each one of those are a bunch of little sub-things. For example, you can satisfy the impact by, and we don't get enough of it, you built a new machine because you get your research done with the extant machines available. And then it becomes infrastructure. So that's a greater impact. So it's not just pieces and minorities, it's all that. In fact, what we're trying to do now in the greater Philadelphia region, which includes Delaware and so on, there's so many assets around here that you can tap into. We don't know what they are. So we're doing asset map. We got some money from NSF to create an asset map of all the assets in the region. And at Penn, we're starting something that there are things at Penn in the School of Arts and Sciences, in the medical school, the biology department, engineering, for connection with K-12, and nobody knows what the other person's doing. So we're going to set up a URL site. And the end is, most nicely, is this started about 6-8 months ago. The Vice Provost of Research calls my office one day and says, You got to help me because there are a lot of professors calling my office saying, I got to do something for impact and outreach, and I think it's a good idea, but I don't know what to do. So I said, let's get together. So we started this thing. We have about 10 programs we found at Penn, all supported, all staffed. So professor can go to this URL and look and see which one he likes, picks it up, and then works with the person who's doing that. Get it? So then we're going to hopefully do it. Why can't a Penn professor work with this other Penn professor, or a Temple professor, a Drexel professor? So we do it for the region, the Delaware professor. And this is going to be very exciting to map the assets. So it's a little too many words. I wasn't brief like Calvino says I should be on that one.
Thank you.
Yes. Oh.
Just a comment, a question. You said NSF's about 50 years old. About 50 years ago, Dwight Eisenhower gave a famous speech where he warned of the military-industrial complex. But also in that speech, if I may quote here on my little iPhone, he also warned, the prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. It's a part of the speech that often is forgotten, but would you comment on that?
Well, the last words are greatly to be regarded. I agree with that. Everything we do has to be challenged all the time because it's like your intent for society. Things drift, and unless we keep our eye on the ball, that's the most important thing about NSF officers is to keep their eye on the ball here and make sure we don't drift into something that becomes a bureaucracy because it's easy to do. But it didn't say it was bad. It says, look at these things. That's what that's about. And there's an example, the world in your hand, your thumbs, how you get the speaker by taking your iPhone out or whatever it is, and you find this thing, and you find the quote, and I don't have the quote. I'm teasing you a little bit, but it's an example of power. In fact, this discussion means that we can challenge each other, and that's what we should do. Yes?
How do you see the future of the research university and the relationship between university, industry, and federal government in terms of funding?
Well, there's a policy in our country to use taxpayers' money to fund research. Now, with that being said, it has to be done well so we don't get in a kind of situation. We have a complex in which you get into a bureaucracy. I need that money. Now you owe me that money. Now, merit review is the number one thing in SF I push people on is merit review is fine, peer review is fine, but you have to do it meticulously, make sure it's done well, and because many times it isn't. So you have to keep at this all the time. There is no way now, I think, to do the kind of research frontier I was describing in the abstract, really eclectic, really moving, risky stuff. There's no way to do it in companies anymore. There used to be some research places that were able to do it. It's gone now. So the only place left to get the knowledge is out of academia. So there has to be a partnership here. That does not mean that academia should start doing what the private sector is skilled at, nor should the private sector start doing what the university is skilled at. For example, many people say, oh, we can fix up K-12 and so on. Maybe they can, but we got to work together on all these things, but not take over. So I guess the bottom line on my response is the partnership has to be real, there has to be trust among everybody, and the skills at the table are eclectic, and somebody's got to integrate them to move the whole thing ahead. Is that an answer that makes some sense, or I'm not answering the right question here? I feel.
Well, I was meaning, what do you see the future would be? I mean, how things would move?
How what would move? Oh, yes, yeah. I think it will be robust. And from the way I'm presenting the things today, I still work on these things. And we talked about somebody today about the $129 million at the Navy Yard, not in Philadelphia, but in the greater Philadelphia, Delaware Valley region, because Delaware is involved, everybody. The idea there is to put this money into enabling the things we talk about retrofitting houses, efficient energy, and so on. Use all the knowledge we have, keep researching, do it, find a way that might click on something, and then you would have the Ben Franklin Partnership put some money into starting small companies, And then you would have another group, actually Princeton's in this part of it, with the Delaware Industrial Resource Center to educate the workforce that's coming along now with the development of this new company, so that the workers are there when the company really starts pumping on these things, and so on. So that's an example of a kind of investment that can enable something. But the real key there is to get from the 120 million to a new kind of private sector economy, not government economy. So I think things are going to be robust. And since I'm part of this thing, we've got to make this thing work, or we'll be embarrassed. You've got to do it. So that's pressure, and that's good. Okay,
Let's thank our speaker one more time.
Thank you.